Jared Foster stood on the edge of the bustling Velkeren market, feeling utterly lost. The alien metropolis was alive with energy, its towering buildings glowing softly under the twin suns. Streets were packed with alien species from across the galaxy, each one stranger than the last. Jared, a human from Earth, stuck out like a sore thumb in his patched-up jacket and worn-out boots. He was broke, hungry, and out of options. His stomach growled as he wandered through the market, the sense of strange alien food making his hunger worse. Jared sighed. His job as a starship mechanic had been steady until last month when the shipyard closed. Since then, he'd been scraping by on small repair jobs, but even those had dried up. Now he needed a place to stay, or at least a roof over his head while he figured things out. That's when he saw the sign. It was written in Velkeren Common, a language Jared had learned enough of to get by. Boarding house. Rooms for rent. The building was tucked away at the end of a narrow street. It looked old and run down, with peeling paint and a flickering holo sign. Still, Jared's options were limited. He adjusted the tool belt slung across his shoulder and stepped inside. The interior wasn't much better. The walls were scuffed, and the air smelled faintly of burnt circuits. A faint buzzing sound came from a corner where a holo panel flickered erratically. But at least it was quiet, and the place seemed safe. Jared's eyes scanned the room until they landed on the figure standing behind a cluttered counter. Cathena was unlike any alien Jared had seen before. She was tall and willowy, with pale lavender skin that shimmered faintly under the light. Her large, dark eyes narrowed as she looked him up and down, clearly unimpressed. A pair of delicate fins on the sides of her head twitched in annoyance. "What do you want, human?" she asked, her voice sharp but not unkind. Jared held up his hands in a gesture of peace. "I saw the sign. I need a room." Cathena crossed her arms, her gaze skeptical. "Rooms aren't free, and you don't look like you have credits to spare." Jared hesitated. She wasn't wrong. "I don't have credits," he admitted, "but I'm good with machines. I can fix things. Maybe we can work something out." Cathena raised an eyebrow, her fins twitching again. "Fix things." She gestured around the room. "Do you see this place? Half of it barely works. Everyone promises they can fix it. No one ever does." Jared stepped closer, setting his tool belt on the counter. "Let me prove it. One repair, no charge. If I can't fix it, I'll leave. But if I can, maybe we can talk about a deal." Cathena studied him for a long moment, her dark eyes unreadable. Finally, she sighed. "Fine. The heating unit in the main hall hasn't worked in weeks. If you can fix it, I'll consider letting you stay, for now." "Deal," Jared said, grabbing his tools. Cathena led him down a hallway that was dimly lit and filled with the faint hum of broken machinery. She stopped in front of a bulky, outdated heating unit mounted on the wall. "There it is," she said, folding her arms. "Good luck." Jared crouched down, inspecting the unit. It was an old model, the kind Earth mechanics had stopped using decades ago, but Jared's eyes lit up. He'd worked on something similar during his training. "This shouldn't take long," he said confidently. Cathena leaned against the wall, watching as Jared got to work. He opened the unit's panel, revealing a tangle of wires and components. Using a multi-tool from his belt, he began to sort through the mess, carefully reconnecting loose wires and replacing a fried circuit with a spare part he carried. After about 20 minutes, Jared stepped back and pressed a button on the unit. With a low hum, the heating system roared to life, filling the hallway with warm air. Cathena's fins twitched in surprise. "You actually fixed it." Jared grinned, wiping his hands on his jacket. "Told you. I'm good with machines." For the first time, Cathena's stern expression softened. She looked at him thoughtfully. "All right, human. You've earned a chance. You can stay for now, but don't think this means you're off the hook. If you're going to live here, you'll be fixing a lot more than just the heater." Jared nodded, relief washing over him. "Deal. I'll earn my keep." As Cathina turned to leave, Jared couldn't help but smile. He finally had a roof over his head. And maybe, just maybe, a chance to turn his luck around. Jared woke up the next morning to the sound of creaking pipes and the hum of malfunctioning machinery. The small room Cathina had given him was simple but comfortable: a cot in the corner, a small desk, and a single window that let in a faint glow from the Velkarin city outside. It wasn't much, but it was better than sleeping in the street. He stretched, groaning as he got up. His muscles were sore from yesterday's work on the heater, but he felt good knowing he'd earned his place here, even if just for now. A loud crash from the hallway startled him. Jared quickly pulled on his boots and grabbed his tool belt before stepping out of the room. "Cathina," he called out, his voice echoing down the dimly lit corridor. "In here." Her voice came from the main living area, sounding irritated. Jared followed the sound and found Cathina standing in the middle of a mess. A large, insect-like creature scurried across the floor, its long legs clicking against the tiles. Cathina swatted at it with a broom, her fins twitching with annoyance. "What is that?" Jared asked, startled. "Glarth bugs," she said, scowling. "They'd been infesting the walls for weeks. I've tried everything, but they keep coming back." Jared watched as the bug disappeared into a crack in the wall. "I've seen worse," he said, grabbing a panel from his tool belt. "Let me take a look." Cathina hesitated, then stepped aside, watching as Jared knelt by the crack. He pulled out a small scanner and ran it along the wall. The screen lit up, showing dozens of tiny heat signatures moving through the structure. "Looks like they've made a nest in the pipes," Jared said. "No wonder your systems are all acting up. These little guys are probably chewing through the wiring." Cathina sighed, leaning on her broom. "And what do you suggest, human? Unless you have a magic way to get rid of them, this house is going to fall apart." Jared grinned. "No magic, just old-fashioned know-how. But first, I'll need some supplies." An hour later, Jared was back with a collection of parts he'd scavenged from the junkyard near the market. Cathina had reluctantly given him permission, though she seemed skeptical of his plan. He worked quickly, setting up a small device near the heating vents. Cathina watched, her arms crossed. "What is that supposed to do?" she asked. "It's a sonic repeller," Jared explained, tightening a bolt. "These bugs react to certain frequencies. This should drive them out without causing any damage." Cathina raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. Jared pressed a button, and the device emitted a low humming sound. At first, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the walls seemed to come alive. Dozens of Glarth bugs scuttled out of the cracks and vents, fleeing the noise. Jared and Cathina watched as the bugs poured out of the house and disappeared into the street. Cathina's fins twitched in surprise. It actually worked. "Told you," Jared said with a grin. Cathina looked at him thoughtfully. "Maybe you're more useful than I thought, human." With the bugs gone, Jared turned his attention to the rest of the house. The building was old, and nearly everything in it seemed to be falling apart. Over the next few days, he worked tirelessly, repairing broken panels, fixing the plumbing, and rewiring the faulty electrical systems. Cathina hovered nearby, watching him work. At first, she offered sharp comments about his methods, but as the repairs piled up, her tone softened. She even started bringing him food, a strange but tasty alien stew, while he worked. "You're really determined," she said one evening as Jared patched up a leaking pipe in the kitchen. "Gotta earn my keep," Jared replied, wiping his hands on a rag. Cathina studied him for a moment, then nodded. "I suppose I respect that." As the days passed, Jared began to notice more about Cathina. Beneath her stern demeanor, she carried a quiet sadness. He learned that her husband had died several years ago, leaving her to manage the boarding house alone. The neighborhood wasn't kind to widows, and Cathina had struggled to keep the house running. One evening, as they sat in the small common area, Cathina surprised him by opening up. "I didn't expect to have a human tenant," she said, her voice soft. And I didn't expect to end up on Velkura, Jared replied. Life's funny like that. Kathena glanced at him, her dark eyes thoughtful. Perhaps, but you're not like the others who promised to help. You actually keep your word. Jared smiled. Well, I try. Kathena didn't say anything more, but for the first time, Jared thought he saw a flicker of gratitude in her expression. That night, as Jared lay in his cot, he thought about his strange new life on Velkura. The city was harsh, the work was hard, and Kathena wasn't the easiest person to please. But for the first time in weeks, he felt like he had a purpose. Maybe, just maybe, he'd finally found a place where he belonged. The following week, the quiet rhythm of life at the boarding house was suddenly interrupted. Jared was in the middle of fixing a burst pipe in the hallway when he heard a sharp knock on the door. It was early in the afternoon, and Kathena was nowhere to be seen. Jared wiped his hands on his trousers and walked toward the door, wondering who could be visiting. He opened the door to find a tall alien, his skin covered in dark green scales, standing in the doorway. He was flanked by two others, smaller in size, but no less intimidating. The trio had an air of authority about them, something that made Jared's heart skip a beat. Is Kathena here? The leader asked in a low, gravelly voice. Jared hesitated, eyeing them suspiciously. She's in the back. Who are you? The leader smirked. We're here on business. Tell her the Saldor Syndicate wants to speak with her. Jared's stomach dropped. The Saldor Syndicate was the last name anyone wanted to hear in Velkura. They were known for their ruthless ways, controlling everything from the black market to loan sharks. Kathena had mentioned them once, in passing, but Jared hadn't paid much attention at the time. The three men stepped forward, pushing past Jared without waiting for an invitation. We don't have all day, human, the leader said, his voice cold. Jared stepped aside, feeling the tension in the air. I'll go get her, he muttered, swallowing his fear. He found Kathena in her small office at the back of the house. She was scribbling something in a data pad when Jared walked in, looking pale. Kathena, you've got company, he said, his voice low. It's the Saldor Syndicate. She looked up sharply, her expression unreadable. The Syndicate? What do they want? Jared shifted uneasily. I don't know. They're waiting for you out front. Kathena's face hardened, and she stood up slowly. Stay here, human. I'll deal with them. Before Jared could protest, she turned and walked toward the front room. Jared stood frozen in place, unsure of what to do. The last thing he wanted was to get involved in whatever trouble Kathena was facing, but he couldn't just stand by and watch. He followed her, determined to find out more. Kathena stepped into the living area, facing the three members of the syndicate. The leader eyed her carefully, his gaze sharp and calculating. Kathena, he said, his voice smooth but dangerous. You know why we're here. Kathena didn't flinch. I'm not interested in your threats, Rezer. What do you want? Jared stood just outside the doorway, watching quietly. He could feel the tension in the room, the weight of the syndicate's presence hanging heavy in the air. We're here for what you owe us, Rezer said, his grin widening. It's time to pay up. Kathena's expression faltered for a moment. Jared could see the fear in her eyes, even though she was trying to hide it. She took a deep breath, straightening her posture. How much? She asked, her voice firm but strained. Rezer's grin disappeared, replaced by a cold look. Enough to make you regret ever borrowing from us. The debt is growing, Kathena. If you can't pay, we'll take something else. Jared's heart skipped a beat. Something else. He didn't like where this was going. Kathena seemed to notice the same thing, her eyes flicking toward him before quickly turning back to Rezar. We've been over this, she said, her voice steady. I don't have the credits. My husband left me with this burden, and I've been struggling to keep this place running ever since. Rezer looked at her with a mixture of amusement and impatience. I don't care about your sob story, Kathena. Either you pay, or we'll take the house. It's that simple. Jared's mind raced. He had no idea what to do, but something about the situation made him feel uneasy. Cathena's home, the place she had worked so hard to keep, was in danger. He couldn't stand by and let these thugs take it away. He stepped forward, ignoring the warning look Cathena shot him. "What if I can help?" The three syndicate members turned their attention to him. Rezar's expression was unreadable for a moment before he chuckled. "A human," he said, eyeing Jared from head to toe. "And how exactly do you think you can help?" Jared stood tall, trying to hide his nervousness. "I'm good with mechanics. Maybe there's something I can do for you, something in exchange for the debt." Rezar raised an eyebrow. "Interesting. A human mechanic." He exchanged glances with his men, who shrugged. "Fine, I'm listening." Jared took a deep breath. "I've been working on some ships lately. I've got the skills to fix things. If you've got a ship that needs repair, I can take care of it." Rezar leaned back, considering. "You think you can fix one of our ships? You better be good, human. If you mess this up, it won't just be Cathena who suffers." Jared nodded quickly. "I'll get it done. Just give me time." Rezar studied him for a long moment, then smirked. "All right, you've got yourself a deal. Get it fixed, and maybe we'll consider forgiving this debt." Cathena looked at Jared, a mix of surprise and confusion in her expression. She didn't speak, but her gaze lingered on him for a moment longer than necessary. As the syndicate left, Jared felt the weight of the situation settle over him. He had made a deal, a dangerous one, but it was the only option he had. He had no choice but to fix whatever ship the syndicate had in mind. The question now was whether he could do it in time, and if he would survive long enough to see the deal through. The next morning, Jared was up before the sun. His mind raced with thoughts of the deal he had made with the Saldor Syndicate. He hadn't planned on getting involved with them, but now he had no choice. If he didn't fix their ship, Cathena would lose everything. He grabbed his tool belt and headed for the front door, his thoughts a whirlwind. Cathena was still in the kitchen, her back turned as she prepared some strange-looking food. Jared hesitated, unsure if he should speak to her about the situation or just go straight to work. "Cathena," he said, his voice careful. She looked up, eyes tired but sharp. "You're going to fix their ship?" Jared nodded. "I don't have much choice. If I don't, they'll take the house. I'll figure it out." Cathena studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. "You don't know what you're getting into, human. The syndicate doesn't care about anything but power. If you fail, they won't just punish you, they'll make you disappear." Jared swallowed hard, but he wasn't about to back down. "I'm not worried about me. I'm worried about you." She softened, just a little. "You're a strange one. Most people wouldn't stick their necks out for someone like me." "Guess I'm not like most people," Jared said with a grin. Cathena gave him a small, approving nod. "Be careful, Jared. Don't make any mistakes. If you get caught in their game, there won't be an easy way out." Jared gave her a reassuring smile before turning to leave. "I'll be fine." The syndicate's ship wasn't far from the boarding house. Jared had seen it parked on the outskirts of the city, surrounded by other ships in various stages of disrepair. As he approached, he saw the ship, a massive, jagged-looking thing, standing like a broken beast among the others. Its hull was covered in dents, and the engines were visibly rusted, the paint chipped and peeling away. Rezar and his men were standing nearby, watching Jared's approach. Rezar gave him a sharp nod as he arrived. "Here to work, human?" Rezar asked, his voice low and cold. Jared nodded, swallowing his nerves. "I'll have it running in no time. Just need some time and the right parts." Rezar smirked, his arms crossed. "You've got 2 days. Don't make excuses." Jared glanced at the ship. It was worse than he had expected. The engine was completely shot, and the wiring was a tangled mess. Even the outer plating was damaged, likely from years of neglect. It was going to take all his skill to get this thing back into working order. He set to work right away, crawling underneath the ship to assess the engine. It was a large, complex piece of machinery that seemed to be falling apart from the inside out. But Jared was no stranger to fixing broken things. He had done it for years back on Earth. The ship's problems, though serious, were fixable. For the next several hours, Jared worked tirelessly. He replaced parts, rewired the damaged systems, and patched up the hull where it was most damaged. It was slow work, and his hands were covered in grease and dirt, but he was determined. Every time he thought about the syndicate's threat, his resolve grew stronger. He wasn't just fixing the ship, he was fighting for Kothena's future. Around midday, Kothena arrived, bringing him a bowl of food and a drink. Jared gratefully accepted, wiping his hands on a rag. She sat down beside him, watching him work for a moment. "You're making progress," she said quietly, her voice almost surprised. Jared nodded, trying not to show how tired he was. "I've still got a long way to go. This ship is falling apart at the seams. But I'll fix it. I won't let them take the house." Kothena watched him closely. "I don't know how you do it," she said softly. "You don't even know these people, and yet you're willing to risk everything to help me." Jared smiled tiredly. "You're not just anyone, Kothena. You helped me when I had nothing. I'm just returning the favor." She didn't say anything more, but her expression softened. She knew better than to argue with his decision. As the second day passed, Jared felt the pressure mounting. The ship was still far from ready, and the clock was ticking. He worked through the night, his body growing exhausted, but he refused to stop. Every time he thought he couldn't go any further, he thought about Kothena, her struggles, her kindness, and it gave him the strength to keep going. By the time the second day rolled around, the ship was nearly fixed. The engines hummed to life, and the damaged outer plating had been reinforced. The wiring had been fully repaired, and the cockpit was functioning again. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough to get the syndicate's ship off the ground. Jared wiped his hands on his pants, looking up at the ship with a sense of accomplishment. He had done it. He had fixed the ship in time. As he walked back to where Reza and his men were waiting, Jared couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. He had made it through. Reza raised an eyebrow as he approached. "You actually did it." Jared gave a small smile. "Told you I would." Reza grunted, then gestured toward the ship. "It's good enough for now. You've earned Kothena's debt back. But don't get comfortable. We'll be watching you." Jared nodded, his heart racing. "I'm not looking for trouble. I just want to help her." Reza didn't respond, but his eyes narrowed before he turned away. As the syndicate left, Jared felt a wave of relief wash over him. The worst was over for now. But deep down, he knew this was just the beginning. The syndicate had a long reach, and Kothena's problems were far from solved. But for the first time in a long time, Jared felt hopeful. He had fought for something, and he had won. Jared woke up early the next day, exhausted but relieved. The ship was fixed, and the syndicate had taken their leave, leaving Kothena's boarding house safe for the time being. He stretched, feeling the familiar soreness in his muscles, but the sense of accomplishment made it worth it. Kothena was already up and preparing breakfast when Jared stepped into the kitchen. She glanced up as he entered, her eyes flicking over him with a mixture of appreciation and something else, something he couldn't quite place. "You actually did it," she said, setting a plate of food in front of him. "I wasn't sure you could pull it off." Jared took a seat and dug into the meal. It was a stew with a strange, spicy flavor, but he didn't mind. After the long hours of work, it tasted like the best thing he had ever eaten. "I told you I could fix it," he replied with a grin. "It wasn't easy, but it's done." Kothena leaned against the counter, watching him. "I don't know how to thank you for this, Jared. You've done more for me than anyone ever has." Jared looked up, meeting her gaze. "You don't need to thank me. I couldn't just stand by and let them take everything you've worked for." She smiled faintly, but there was a sadness in her eyes. You've got a good heart, human. But this isn't over. The syndicate doesn't forget debts that easily. They'll be back. Jared's smile faded. He had feared this. The Saldor syndicate wasn't known for their kindness, and he knew better than to believe they would simply let Cathena off the hook. I know, he said quietly. But for now, I'll take what we can get. At least we have some time. Cathena nodded, though her expression remained serious. I'll be ready, but I don't want you getting hurt in the process. You've already done enough. Jared stood up, wiping his hands on his pants. I'll be fine. Just focus on running the house. I've got it covered. The next few days were peaceful, surprisingly so. Jared continued with the repairs and improvements around the boarding house, and Cathena seemed more relaxed. She even started sharing stories about her past, her husband, and the struggles she had faced in keeping the house afloat. Jared listened intently, realizing how much she had been through. But in the back of his mind, the feeling of unease never went away. The syndicate had promised they would be back, and he didn't doubt that they would find some way to collect on their debt. Jared had seen enough in his life to know that people like Rezer didn't forget easily. On the 4th day after the ship repair, Jared's worst fear was realized. He was out in the yard, fixing some broken fencing when he saw a familiar shadow approach. His heart sank as he saw a group of 4 syndicate enforcers walking down the street, their eyes fixed on the boarding house. Cathena had been inside, working on some paperwork, but Jared didn't waste a second. He quickly moved toward the house, his mind racing. What now? He rushed inside, finding Cathena sitting at the table. She didn't look up as he entered, but he could tell something was wrong. The syndicate, he said, his voice tight with urgency. Cathena stood up quickly, her face turning pale. I knew this wouldn't last. They've come for me again. Jared stepped closer, his thoughts scrambling for a plan. What do we do? Cathena's expression hardened. We faced them head on. I've got nothing left to lose. Before Jared could respond, the door slammed open, and the syndicate enforcers marched in. Rezer wasn't with them, but the air was thick with the same cold, threatening energy. One of the enforcers, a large alien with glowing red eyes, stepped forward. Cathena, he said, his voice gruff. The syndicate wants its due. You've had your time, but now you pay. Jared took a step forward, his fists clenched. She's paid. The debt's been cleared. The enforcer laughed, a deep, rumbling sound. You think you can talk to us, human. You don't know how this works. The syndicate always gets what it's owed. Cathena stepped between Jared and the enforcers, her hands raised in a gesture of calm. I've given you all I can. There's nothing left to take. If you want my house, then take it, but leave me and him out of this. The enforcer tilted his head, studying her. You've got guts. I'll give you that. But this isn't over yet. Jared watched, heart pounding, as the enforcer turned his gaze to him. We'll let you two live, for now, but don't get comfortable. The syndicate will always find a way to collect. Cathena stood her ground, her voice steady. You don't scare me. You can take the house, but you'll never break me. The enforcer didn't respond, but there was a flash of something in his eyes. Respect, perhaps, or maybe just the recognition of a worthy opponent. He turned to leave, signaling the others to follow. As the door slammed shut behind them, Cathena let out a long breath, the tension in her shoulders slowly easing. Jared stood there, watching her, unsure of what to say. I'm sorry, she said quietly, turning to him. I thought I could handle this alone. But now you're involved too. Jared shook his head. You didn't ask for this, Cathena. I'm the one who chose to help. She looked at him, a flicker of something, maybe gratitude, passing through her eyes. I don't know how to repay you. Jared smiled, the weight of the situation still heavy on his chest. You don't have to. Just promise me you'll stay strong. Cathena nodded slowly, her gaze steady. I will. And I'll make sure you stay safe too. The days following the syndicate's visit were filled with tension. Jared and Kathina couldn't shake the feeling that the threat was far from over. Every noise outside made them jump. Every shadow seemed like a potential danger. But they couldn't keep living in fear. Jared had fixed enough broken things in his life to know that sometimes you had to face your problems head-on. And for all the things he didn't know, he was sure of one thing. Kathina deserved a fighting chance. She had worked too hard to let the syndicate take everything away. The quiet was shattered one afternoon when an unexpected visitor arrived. Jared was tinkering with a busted communicator in the workshop when he heard a knock at the door. He wiped his hands on his pants and made his way to the front room. Kathina was in the kitchen, and Jared wasn't sure if she had heard the knock. When he opened the door, he was surprised to see a figure standing there. A tall, slender alien with glowing blue skin and a strange set of symbols tattooed across her arms. She looked like someone who didn't belong on a backwater planet like Valkara. "Can I help you?" Jared asked, eyeing the stranger carefully. The alien gave him a calm, measured look. "I'm looking for Kathina. Is she home?" Jared hesitated. Kathina wasn't one to entertain visitors unless it was absolutely necessary. And yet, something about the woman's demeanor made Jared feel like this wasn't a typical encounter. "She's inside," Jared said, stepping aside. "But I don't know who you are." The alien smiled faintly. "I'm known as Sira, and I'm here to talk to Kathina." Kathina entered the room a moment later, wiping her hands on a cloth. She froze when she saw Sira, her eyes narrowing as she approached. "Sira?" Kathina asked, her voice guarded. "I didn't expect to see you again." Sira's smile widened slightly, though her expression remained serious. "I had hoped our paths would cross again, Kathina. You've been in trouble, haven't you?" Jared could feel the tension in the air, but he stayed quiet, not sure whether he should leave or stay. Kathina glanced at him, then back at Sira. "You've heard about the syndicate, haven't you?" Kathina asked, crossing her arms. Sira nodded slowly. "I've heard rumors. They don't take kindly to people who try to get out of their control, but I can help you." Kathina's gaze sharpened. "Help me? With what?" Sira stepped closer, her voice low and serious. "I've been keeping an eye on the syndicate for a while now. They've been expanding their influence in this sector, but they have weaknesses. I know how to get to them, Kathina, and I can offer you protection if you're willing to make a deal." Jared stepped forward now, feeling uneasy. "What kind of deal?" Sira turned to him, her eyes cold but not unfriendly. "Nothing you need to worry about, human. This is between Kathina and me." But Kathina shook her head. "No. If you're involved, then he's involved too. We're in this together now." Sira studied Jared for a moment, then gave a small nod. "Very well. The syndicate is ruthless, but they have a weakness. A man named Rezer. He's the one pulling the strings in this region. But there's something you don't know about him. He's not as invincible as he seems." Jared exchanged a look with Kathina. "What's the weakness?" Sira's eyes gleamed with a strange mixture of excitement and caution. "Rezer has a secret, something that would ruin him if it were exposed. And I have the means to expose it." Kathina frowned, clearly not trusting the stranger entirely. "And why would you want to help us?" Sira's gaze softened, but there was still an edge to her voice. "I've had my own dealings with the syndicate. They don't play fair, Kathina. I want to see them brought down, just as much as you do. If we can destroy Rezer's hold over the sector, we can free you from their debt. And perhaps more than that." Jared watched Kathina closely, knowing that she was weighing her options. Sira wasn't someone to be trusted easily, but the idea of bringing down the syndicate, of finally putting an end to the looming threat, was tempting. "I'm not sure we can trust you," Kathina said slowly, her voice firm. Sira sighed, almost as if she had been expecting the answer. "I'm not asking for your trust, Kathina. I'm offering you a chance to fight back. The syndicate will keep pushing you, keep taking from you, until there's nothing left. You've seen that already. Cathena hesitated, but Jared could see the wheels turning in her mind. She didn't want to trust Sira, but she also knew the syndicate wouldn't give up. I can't do this alone, Cathena admitted, her voice quieter now. And I don't have any other options. Syra's expression softened, her tone almost kind. Then let me help you. Together, we can make them regret ever crossing you. Jared couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment. He had just entered a battle that was bigger than anything he had faced before. But for Cathena, he knew he couldn't turn back now. All right, Jared said, his voice steady. I'm in. We do this together. Cathena turned to him, her expression unreadable. Are you sure, human? This will only get more dangerous from here on out. Jared nodded firmly. I'm sure. I've got your back, Cathena. Sira smiled, a look of approval crossing her face. Then it settled. Let's bring down the syndicate. Jared stood at the edge of the room, feeling the weight of the decision hanging over him. Cathena had agreed to Sira's plan, and now they were preparing for their final confrontation with the syndicate. The air was thick with anticipation, and even though Jared had fought through difficult situations before, he could feel that this was different. This wasn't just a repair job or a small fix. This was war. Sira had laid out the plan in the small workshop, a series of detailed steps that relied on their timing and precision. It was clear that they would need to act fast and without hesitation if they hoped to succeed. The syndicate, with all its power, had a lot at stake, and the longer they dragged their feet, the more dangerous it became. We have to hit them hard and fast, Sira explained, her eyes glinting with a quiet intensity. Once we expose Rezar's secret, the rest of his hold on this sector will crumble, but we can't afford to fail. Cathena stood by her side, arms crossed, eyes sharp. And what exactly is this secret? How do we know it will work? Sira glanced between Cathena and Jared, her expression unreadable. Rezar is hiding something much darker than anyone knows, something that could destroy his entire reputation. But I need you both to trust me on this. If we can gather the evidence and broadcast it at the right moment, we'll break him. Jared, who had been silent for most of the conversation, finally spoke up. And you're sure we can pull this off without alerting the syndicate before we're ready? Sira nodded slowly. I've already arranged for the diversion. While we infiltrate, the syndicate will be distracted. It's the perfect time to strike. Cathena exchanged a look with Jared. She had always been cautious, but the desperation in her eyes told him that there was no turning back now. All right, Cathena said with a sigh, her voice steady despite the nerves he could see behind her calm facade. Let's do this. We don't have much time. The plan was set into motion the next day. They had only one shot to get it right. The syndicate's headquarters was located in a tall building on the outskirts of the city. It was heavily guarded, with drones patrolling the skies and armed enforcers watching every entrance. To make matters worse, Rezar himself was known to be highly protective of his secrets, and they had no idea how close they were to finding him. Sira had arranged for a distraction at one of the syndicate's lesser-known safe houses. It was risky, but it would pull the guards away from their main headquarters long enough for the team to slip inside undetected. Jared and Cathena, dressed in dark clothing and equipped with small communication devices, waited in the shadows outside the building. The streets were eerily quiet as they observed the guards moving in and out of the building, their expressions cold and indifferent. Ready? Sira's voice came through the earpiece, calm and collected. Ready, Jared replied, his heart pounding. This was it. Cathena gave him a small nod. Let's get to work. They crept along the alley, making their way toward the back of the building where Sira had identified a weak point in the security. The entrance was hidden behind a large dumpster, and it would take precise timing to avoid being seen by the guards. Jared's breath came out in quiet bursts as they slipped past the first security checkpoint. His muscles tensed as they made their way deeper into the building. Every step felt like it could be their last, but they pressed on, knowing they had no other choice. Inside, the building was dark and silent. They moved through the hallways quickly, sticking to the shadows and avoiding the few guards still patrolling. The elevator to the higher floors was locked, but Sira had given them a special keycard, and within moments, they were on their way up to the syndicate's main office. When they reached the top floor, the door to the office stood before them, heavily guarded by two enforcers. They couldn't risk a confrontation. They had to be quick. Jared glanced at Kathina, who nodded. They'd been through worse, and they had made it this far. Together, they stepped forward in unison, quietly disabling the guards without making a sound. It was a delicate operation, but their teamwork was flawless. Once inside the office, the atmosphere changed. The room was luxurious, filled with expensive furnishings and a large desk covered in papers. At the back of the room, a massive screen displayed live feeds from the building's security cameras. Sira had been right. Rezer was hiding something, and it was in plain sight. Here, Kathina said, pointing to a set of encrypted files on the desk. She quickly hacked into the system, pulling up the files they needed. The truth was in those documents, and once they exposed it, Rezer would have nowhere to run. Suddenly, Jared's earpiece crackled. "It's done." Sira's voice came through urgent. "The distraction is working. Now go." Without wasting any more time, Kathina hit the button to send the files to the public feed. The screen flickered for a moment, then displayed the documents for the whole world to see. The truth about Rezer's involvement in illegal dealings, his alliances with corrupt officials, and the extortion operations he ran under the syndicate's name was now out in the open. It was over. For a moment, everything stood still. Then, all hell broke loose. The syndicate would never recover from this blow, and Kathina's nightmare was finally over. But the fight had taken everything from them, and the scars would remain. Jared turned to Kathina, a tired but proud smile on his face. "We did it," he said. Kathina nodded, her eyes soft but resolute. "We did, and we're still standing." The battle was won, but Jared knew there would always be more challenges ahead. But now he didn't have to face them alone. With Kathina, and maybe even Sira, by his side, he was ready for whatever came next.